Hi everybody, it's fantastic to be here. Thank you for having us to come and speak. Thank you to the JDRF for setting up this fantastic event. My name's Jeremy. Fortunately I didn't get introduced as Dr Jeremy Robertson, so I don't have to say I'm not here as a doctor. I'm just here as Jeremy because, just like so many of you, I also have type 1 diabetes.
G'day everyone, my name's Ben Sive. Unlike Jeremy, I'm not a doctor, but I'm a captain with Rex Airlines. I'm a captain on the Saab 340. I was diagnosed with type 1 2.5 years ago, and I'm fortunate enough to be a part of this sort of, let's call it, diabetic renaissance of airline pilots with type 1 coming back to fly.
So what we're going to talk about today is really just our story, where we were, pre-diabetes, our experiences of diagnosis and our journey from that point forward that's led us really to be here today. And someone told me if I press this button, we'll get some cheesy photos of me from the mid-90s. So I grew up in Canberra, and I really can't ever remember a time in my life when I wasn't interested in aeroplanes. So much so that I put a business case to my parents at the end of year 10 that I should not go to the private boys' school I was at. I should go to the public school and they could spend that money on flying lessons instead. I was successful in that, so by the end of year 12 I had my private licence. I moved to Sydney to go to university, and I did a Bachelor of Aviation at UNSW. So 3 years later I popped out with all the professional qualifications I needed to be a commercial pilot. It's a well-trodden path in Australia to go up to the northern part of Australia and spend a couple of years flying around in small aeroplanes. So this is me in a community just on the edge of the Simpson Desert in northern Western Australia. And I spent 2 years living in Kununurra and flying around the whole northwest of Australia, the Kimberley, which was an incredible experience, lots of adventures. And then I was very fortunate that I was employed by Qantas, and I joined as a second officer on the 747. The second officer is really the apprenticeship position. You do a lot of sitting and watching, a lot of folding the paperwork. But you get to do cool things like fly to Athens in 2004 and pick up the Olympic team and fly them back to Australia. I spent 5 years doing that, and then I was promoted to first officer on the 767, which is a 300-seat passenger aeroplane. It gets used for trunk route domestic and Southeast Asia international flying. You can see from that photo I'm clearly not enjoying myself. This was the first time I got let loose in the jet. So here's me, 26 years old, just having the time of my life. And like I said, I can't really remember a time when I wasn't interested in aeroplanes. So even when I wasn't at work, a lot of my spare time was aeroplanes. Yes, there was some surfing and some motorbike riding, but predominantly it was aeroplanes. The photo in the top left there is an aeroplane I used to own a share of. I owned 1/20th of that aeroplane with 19 other people. I'm not sure which 20th it was, but they let me use all the aeroplane, and I'd take friends for scenic flights. That little yellow aeroplane in the middle, just don't look at it, Ben, because I know you don't like it.
Yeah, I look at an aeroplane like that and it gives me a little bit of anxiety, actually. That's not for me. It's got to be pressurised with two big jets, otherwise I'm not hopping in it.
It's an aeroplane called a drifter. It's an ultralight. It's like flying a motorbike. You're sitting out there, the widest part of the aeroplane is the seat you're sitting on, and you're just flying around in outer space. It's great. I used to do some ad hoc work for a skydive company, so that top right photo is once all the skydivers have got out the back door. I learnt to fly an old World War II Tiger Moth to do aerobatics. That's the bottom left. My poor long-suffering wife in the middle there at the bottom, she's been taken flying in more small aeroplanes than she would care to remember. And yes, I did go to work occasionally, and that was also aeroplanes. And at work, I was getting more and more involved in some very interesting flying. Commercial aeroplanes go through a huge maintenance cycle, which is why they're so reliable and so safe. And the biggest check they have is called a D-check, and the aeroplane will spend 2 to 3 months in the hangar being taken apart and put back together again. And at the end of that, it goes through a 2-day test flight program to make sure it's safe, and then it gets sent back to passenger flying. So Qantas trained me to be one of the pilots that would do that test flying on the 767. It was fantastic fun, really difficult technical flying. And it sparked an interest in me, and I thought I need to know a bit more about this style of flying. And there's one civilian test pilot school in the world, and it's the National Test Pilot School in Mojave in California. So I enrolled myself in a 2-week short course, and this is me in Los Angeles converting my license to an American pilot's license. And I was about to go do this 2-week test pilot course. And I was drinking more and more, I was urinating more and more. Got to the point where my mouth was so dry I had to have a sip of water before I could speak. And then my vision went a bit blurry. You know, the world looked the same, whether I was wearing my glasses or I was. And I thought, okay, something's wrong. And I think you can probably all join the dots. My blood sugar level was 25.5, no ketones, fortunately. On the other side of the planet, 6 weeks before our planned wedding. And I knew enough about diabetes to know that this was probably type 1 and this had ended my flying career. So I hopped on an aeroplane home, came back to Australia, went through the process of being formally diagnosed. I remember sitting in the doctor's surgery in Los Angeles crying and calling my fiancée at that time, because she was just about to hop on an aeroplane and go off on a 2-week work trip through Southeast Asia. And I got a medical discharge from Qantas and we got married, which was wonderful. And I figured out what to do with the rest of my life. And this photo is the it's going to be all right moment that I had. So my ultralight licence, my private licence, my commercial licence, they all went as soon as I got diagnosed. The ultralight licence is based on your driver's licence. So as soon as my diabetes was under enough control for my endo to sign my driver's licence form, I was allowed back in those scary little yellow aeroplanes. And this particular aeroplane is a Piper Cub, and a friend of mine up at Noosa owned this. And I went up and spent a little bit of time with him, and it was a beautiful evening. And I took it and flew up the Rainbow Sands north of Noosa. And this aeroplane flies so slow you can slide the windows open and stick your elbows out, which is what I'm doing here. And I thought, it's okay. Even if I never get back to any form of other flying, and at that point the rules said that was never going to happen, at least wherever life takes me, I can come and do this occasionally.
And I suppose this is where I take over. So this is sort of me before type 1. As I mentioned, I'm a captain with Rex Airlines. Before that, I was fortunate enough to study at the University of Sydney. While I was studying, I sort of began private flying, just as an interest, just as a hobby. Very quickly realised that, perhaps this was going to be more than a hobby, this might be a job. And I remember actually chatting to my old man, who's here today, at the end of first year university, sitting in the stress of exams and saying to him, barking at him through the phone, "You said this would be fun. Why am I so stressed out?" And he said to me, "Well, what do you love doing?" And I loved flying. And so I knew from that point that that was something I was going to go forth and pursue. So at the completion of my university degree, I was fortunate enough to be admitted by Rex as a cadet. I went and lived in Wagga Wagga for a year, where I basically honed my craft and learnt to fly. That was in 2017, and at the completion of 2017, I became a first officer based in Sydney on the Saab 340, which is the aeroplane pictured in the bottom left-hand of the screen, with me giving a big cheesy thumbs up. I flew as an FO for 3 years, and then COVID hit. And because of I'm sure all of you know what COVID did to the airline industry, but there was an amazing opportunity to move to WA and not only fly as a first officer, but actually upgrade to a command position and become a captain on the Saab. So in 2020, I moved over to WA, set up stumps in Perth, and sort of thought, well, how good's this going to be? And I remember I was 26 years old. I'd just been awarded an airline command, walking out to the jet with the crew, airplane sort of sitting there, each propeller blade as tall as I am, and I just remember thinking, "Ooh, I'm bad." It was pretty cool. Then in February of 2021, so I'd been in Perth for probably just shy of 6 months, and I began to experience pretty standard symptoms of undiagnosed type 1, which, look, I don't think I really need to go into. I think everyone is loosely across those. albeit that it was a very rapid deterioration. And I remember it was Wednesday and I woke up feeling particularly crook. And I remember thinking, oh, probably shouldn't go flying today. So I called work up, said I wasn't going to come in. And as the day progressed, I remember feeling worse and worse. And then eventually it got to the point where I said to my housemates in WA, I think I need to go to hospital. I think I'm getting really sick. And they took me into Sir Charles Gardner, and I walked into the ED there, and they did a finger prick on a blood glucometer after I told them the symptoms, and then it just registered as high on the machine, which is obviously, I'm sure you all know what that means. And then they said, oh, can you jump in this wheelchair for us? So they're wheeling me through the hospital, and I remember thinking, this is overkill, guys. Like, I'm right. And then we went into the emergency department, and everything sort of, all hell broke loose, and the registrar walked in and asked what religion I was, I remember, and I'm thinking, oh, we're doing religions, like, seems a bit serious. But was diagnosed within about 30 minutes of arriving at hospital. And again, a bit like Jez, I knew what the professional implication was. I knew that this could mean the end of my career. And here are some happy snaps from that period of my life. And, I remember during my stay in a hospital, there was probably, the overarching emotion was probably fear and stress, given the fact that, this career that I'd worked so hard towards had been taken away from me. But I also remember about 2 days into my stay in hospital feeling super pumped up, like a clear change in mindset and being like, this won't be the end of me. This will just be, a mate of mine from work actually described it as another chapter in the autobiography, and I was pretty determined to make it that. And I suppose that's where Tough and Competent comes into it, that's a picture of Gene Kranz, who was the Apollo mission director. And after Apollo 1, there was, during a training sort of mission on the launch pad, the crew were killed, and Gene Kranz walked in the next week and wrote on a chalkboard, "Tough and competent, that's the price of admission." And I remember that was a quote my old man had taught me probably about 2 or 3 years before, and that held dear to me and basically started as the first step in what was ultimately probably a 100-step recovery to go back to work. And so began the early stage recovery. So I went from sitting up the front of an aeroplane to sitting down the back, which, despite that looking like an obvious vibe, I wasn't particularly stoked. But this trip is significant. I was diagnosed with type 1 on my 27th birthday, so my anniversary and my birthday the same day. Happy birthday to me. And I remember I was angry and I was stressed and I was frustrated, and I felt like a vocation that I'd dedicated my entire life to up until that point had sort of turned its back on me. So Jeremy said, and I was basically unable to even look at an aeroplane. Like, I was like, how, I can still do this fine, but someone, with a pen says I can't. And then Jeremy and I were put in touch with one another, and Jeremy goes on rural aviation medicine trips as a DAME, so he goes out bush and conducts aviation medicals for people living remotely. And he asked if I wanted to join him on one of these flights. And, I thought initially I was a bit hesitant, but I eventually ended up jumping at the opportunity. And we went on this trip around New South Wales, flying all sorts of aeroplanes, starting sitting in the back of the aeroplane, eventually sitting up the front of an aeroplane and having a bit of a go. And my mindset changed, basically, after this day. So that's one of those little yellow aeroplanes that Jeremy is so fond of.
My favourite.
Yeah, and he's flying that little yellow aeroplane, and I'm sitting in this white aeroplane here, and that's us flying in formation over Mudgee, just north of Mudgee, actually. And I remember taking that photo and seeing Jez fly and thinking, we're doing pretty demanding flying right now. He's flying that aeroplane, I'm flying this aeroplane. We're both type 1 diabetics. We're both exactly the same as we were beforehand. So what's to stop? The world's our oyster in a sense. And my mentality went from being angry and frustrated to being one of thinking, how cool will it be when I get to do that again as a job? And this day, it was in May in 2021, was basically when the cogs started moving, and I began, I moved past the initial shock and awe of being diagnosed with type 1 and probably went with a bit more of a pragmatic approach to returning to the flight deck.
Now, I didn't tell my wife this slide was going in, so she's watching from home. So life goes on. I left Qantas. I learned to live with type 1 diabetes. I think I would be safe to say that I'm still learning to live with type 1 diabetes. I had a serious think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life that didn't involve aeroplanes, and I'd always been interested in medicine. So I thought, I'm 31 years old, I'm probably young enough to have a crack at another big career, and I've got nothing to lose. If I don't get into med school or if I fail at any point, I'm still just back here with, I haven't lost anything. So went through the process of sitting the entrance exam, the interviews, getting into med school, and I kept passing. So 4 years later, I popped out of graduate medicine, and really no small thanks to my amazing wife, who really put her career on hold to raise a young family whilst I was a full-time med student. And I popped out and entered the hospital system as a junior doctor, so that cheesy photo of me in my scrubs is day one in the emergency department at Hornsby Hospital in 2016. And so began my next professional chapter. But because I'm addicted to aeroplanes, anytime I had some spare time, I'd find a little yellow aeroplane. And like I said, I could fly the ultralight, so that little yellow aeroplane in the corner there, I could still fly that in my time off. And then eventually someone decided my diabetes was well controlled enough that I could teach people to fly in these aeroplanes. So little two-seat aeroplanes that are best flown on a sunny day. During uni holidays, I'd go and do some instructing. And that was just a great way for me to at least share some of that previous career with others. And that kind of kick-started a slow process of gradually getting involved in more and more complicated flying. And at this point, I never really had the mindset that I'm going to go and get back to commercial flying. This was just, what can I do with what's available to me right now? While I was in med school, Australia, at that point, the rules said you could hold a private pilot's licence, so to fly bigger than two-seat aeroplanes, as long as you have another pilot with you. So I did that, and that's one of my Qantas pilot mates up the top there. I think I'd actually wagged uni for the day because I just needed to go flying. And then, about the time, or just before I finished med school, the rules changed again and allowed you to fly privately with type 1 diabetes if you were well controlled enough and followed quite a strict protocol. You could fly by yourself without a safety pilot. So I managed to get that happening, and I thought, okay, I can fly privately. What's the biggest aeroplane I can fly on my private licence? And it's probably this blue aeroplane in the bottom there. This was the company I used to skydive for, or fly the skydive aeroplanes for. So I got back in touch with the boss, and he said, yep, sure, come on down, do some skydive flying. So once a fortnight, I'd go and fly the skydive aeroplane, which was great fun. And it's an amazing job because everyone goes skydiving because they want to have fun. So everyone's there to have fun. It's enormous fun. And then, as Ben said, I found by this stage I'd gained an aviation medicine qualification, and I discovered that there weren't very many aviation doctors out in country New South Wales. So the aeroplane there in the bottom right is a little sports car that a friend of mine owns, and I hired off him, and I started flying myself around country towns to see pilots in these country towns for their regular medical examinations. And the irony was not lost on me that I couldn't fly commercially, but I was allowed to tell them they could fly commercially. And that trip, it just got bigger and bigger. And I ended up covering 7 towns over a 4-day period. So I was flying myself 8 sectors in 4 days. And I got pretty good at flying to a schedule and flying with my diabetes. So this is the cockpit of that aeroplane, and that's the setup. I've got my CGM on the phone, on the wrist. I've got my little pump on my nav board there. So I've got all this visibility. And really, it's just another gauge to monitor. I've got all these other cool gauges to monitor, and this is just another one. And I know that if it goes up, I have some insulin. If it goes down, I have some food. And it's really not that hard, because when you're flying, you're just sitting there. You're not distracted by having to run off and chase one of your kids that's just jumped off the bed, or go to an emergency situation in the hospital or something like that. It's a really structured environment. So I actually found it quite easy to manage my blood sugar level in that context compared to other areas. And then I got introduced to this aeroplane. And you can tell
This is a serious aeroplane, by the way.
by the ratio
This
of
is my
size
sort
of
of
engine
aeroplane.
to size of aeroplane. If that last airplane was a sports car, this thing's a rocket ship. It's owned by two businessmen who are private pilots, and they flew it for their business. And they needed someone else to help them fly it privately. So they taught me to fly it, and this is me doing 350 knots, which is 630 kilometres an hour, at 29,000 feet, with my little CGM, up there by myself. And this airplane's faster and higher than the Qantas Link Dash 8s, the Rex Saabs, I'm sorry, Ben. And this is really where I thought, this is what I used to do at Qantas. I'm flying like an airline pilot, but the rules here say I can't fly like an airline pilot. And yeah, I'm an ex-airline pilot, I've got this aeroplane knowledge, I'm a doctor, I've got all this medical knowledge, I've got type 1 diabetes. If someone's going to do something about it, it should probably be me. I was aware at this point that Canada had been allowing pilots with type 1 diabetes to fly since about the mid-2000s. The UK had been allowing it for about 4 or 5 years at this point. So I thought, I meet the requirements to hold medicals in those countries. So I will try and introduce the same system here. So in 2017, I put together a giant submission. I modified the UK protocol to update it to include continuous glucose monitoring. I added in all my experience. I'd been logging all my blood sugar levels for all my flights. I had about 600 hours of flying with type 1 diabetes at this point. And I put a request in for a class 1 medical. And 3 years later, it was approved. So in May 2020, I received my class 1 medical, and that was a month after Qantas had just laid off all these pilots because of COVID. And I just thought, great. But in the ultimate irony, I was gainfully employed in a field that was busy during COVID, and all my colleagues at Qantas were out digging holes, driving trucks, working at Woolies. And I thought, geez, how lucky am I to have had type 1 diabetes and end up here. And it was 12 months later that I was introduced to Ben.
So I suppose this is about where I come into the fold. And I'd heard of Jeremy actually in 2020. And I remember reading about what Jeremy had done when he had been issued his class 1 and thinking that's amazing and it's about time. And there's honestly nothing a type 1 diabetic can't do compared to someone who doesn't have diabetes. But for me, I still had to navigate this sort of world. So there was this glimmer of hope in the distance, albeit fairly dim, but I needed to commodify my type 1 and put it in terms that I could understand. And Jeremy, in a way, did this, but so did teams at the Garvan Institute and many other people. So the top picture there is the vertical climb cruise descent profile of a transport category aircraft, and below is an excerpt from my CGM. And to me, they look pretty similar. I knew what a descent segment to descent schedule map meant. I knew what transitioning into 250 knots below 10,000 feet meant. I knew what a step climb was, but I didn't know what my insulin to carb ratio was. I didn't know how my body reacted to certain foods. I didn't know how it reacted to stress. I didn't know how it reacted to exercise. So it was about figuring that out. And so began the later stage of recovery. And even that picture to the left-hand side is literally a squiggle one of the educators at the Garvan Institute threw together. And I was like, I know what that looks like. I've got one of these at home. And so I was able to commodify it and put it in terms I could understand. And in many ways, because of the amazing support I had in being able to commodify it, my recovery was faster than I think it otherwise would have been. Also, Jez had set the foundation for someone to be the test case and the guinea pig. And I'd just been incredibly fortunate enough to come through at that time in an airline job, flying a transport category aeroplane, with the ability to go back and do it if I was able to get my medical back. And we fast forward to, this was the 28th of February 2022. This was 363 days since being diagnosed. And this was the first day I went back to flying, the first day a type 1 diabetic flew a transport category airplane in Australia. It was a flight from Adelaide to Port Lincoln back to Adelaide. I remember lying in the hotel room the night before and thinking, God, don't mess up, please. And it was a very special day, flying arguably the most important passenger of my career. And he flew himself from Sydney to Adelaide to come sit in the back of my flight from Adelaide to Port Lincoln back to Adelaide.
Yeah, I wasn't going to miss this one.
Yeah. So it was a very, very, very cool day. And the support I received from colleagues that day and Jez, and just such a special time. I remember I hadn't flown obviously in a year, and I was flying with very senior check captains, as is the case for any airline pilot that has a period, extended period off. And I remember disconnecting the autopilot thinking, really hope my hands and feet still work. Turns out they did. And yeah, it was a credible opportunity. And I suppose we fast forward to now, 12 months on from that day, and life continues on as normal. I look at my life pre my type 1 diagnosis and my life now, and certainly professionally, not a lot's changed. The biggest thing that's changed is my outlook, and I think I've developed immensely as a human being, because you have to. You don't take anything for granted. To be able to go fly is an incredible opportunity, an incredible privilege, and it's not lost on me. Even on the days where it's late at night and you might be a little bit over it, you still got to pinch yourself and say, I'm so incredibly lucky to be here. And what I think I didn't really notice is just the wider impact on the industry. More so Jez has had, but to a lesser extent me, guys coming up to us and saying, you're the guy, you're the guy, and like being able to, with a cheesy grin say, yeah, it was a team effort is pretty cool. And I think it's introduced a bit of resilience into our flight crew, in the sense that, just because something bad happens, if life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, albeit with no sugar.
Yeah. So life has moved on for me as well. COVID had a real negative effect on the airlines, but as you know now, they're all going gangbusters. Qantas started recruiting again last year, so I put an application in. The recruitment process is slow and thorough, but I started back at Qantas about a month and a half ago, and they very kindly employed me in 2 roles. I'm working there part-time as an aviation medicine doctor, and shortly I'll be starting my training on the 737, so I'll be flying domestic jets again, which really I'm very excited about, as you can imagine. And that's rewarding. It's been something for me, but more rewarding than that is this. When I first started trying to get my medical back, I got in touch with diabetic pilots overseas. There are heaps of them in the UK, in Canada, in the USA. I got in touch with others here in Australia, because you've been able to fly ultralights forever with type 1 diabetes. So there's heaps of them out there. They're just hard to find. But I found them all. And when they found out what I was trying to do, everyone helped. Everyone gave me support, information, encouragement, copies of their documents, copies of their blood sugar levels, everything. When it kind of became aware of what I was doing, other people started getting in touch with me here in Australia and also overseas. And Ben was one of them. So it's the type 1 community that helped me get to this point, to be able to make the change here in Australia. And now I get to give back, because I've got this type 1 community that I can help and I can get in touch with as needed. We've got Ben flying here, we've got 2 pilots in Perth that are back flying commercially. We've got Grant Mackesy, who's been the first person in Australia with type 1 diabetes to train from scratch up to having a commercial licence. And he's out there starting a commercial pilot career. And we've got any number of people that are in the same situation, that are currently learning to fly with type 1 diabetes, with the goal of becoming a commercial pilot. So that sense of support from the wider type 1 community is really it's been the best thing about all of this.
And life moving forward for me. This is on another one of the rural AvMed trips taken towards the end of last year, and there's a slightly different vibe on these trips as opposed to the one in May of 2021. I get to sit up the front now, which is cool.
Only because I let you.
Yeah. Had to grovel a bit to get that actually, but it was pretty cool. And while there is a slightly different vibe, they're still just as special because it's a time where Jez and I get to go out and fly together, and in a way also reflect on the cool thing that he was able to pioneer, and I was fortunate enough to be a part of. And we have fun. They're good trips. And as Jez mentioned, I was fortunate enough to meet some amazing people during my recovery, and all of which have supported me to return to work and live a happy and healthy life. Sportsmen and women, doctors, pilots, the diabetic community in Australia is nothing short of inspiring. And I think Jez and I can safely say that we're in awe of everyone everyone we meet that deals with type 1 and deals with everything that you have to as a normal human being, but also with chronic illness. You'll have to forgive me for this next part. I'm just going to read off something I wrote because we've tried to keep this as conversational as possible, but I don't want to miss anything in this last part. There's a temptation in life to take the easy route, but there's a real danger in doing this. A danger that when life-defining challenges present themselves, you shy away from these hurdles instead of rising up to take them in your stride. The theme of our talk today is type 1 strong. To be type 1 strong as an individual is impossible. Our strength presents itself in our resolve, our hard work, and those that support us. I used to say that flying aeroplanes is the best team sport in the world. The reality is the effective management of type 1 is the greatest team sport in the world. Type 1 strong is realising the good days and the bad days, acknowledging that no one in life is perfect, but continuing to show up day after day to achieve an end goal, no matter how trivial that might seem. Our strength is in our community, a community built on great leaders and people from all walks of life, a community that inspires Jez and I every day. I've always held the view that type 1 diabetics are the best operators in the world because we have to be. Thank you for the opportunity to let us speak today. Type 1 strong together.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone when I say we're all in awe hearing your stories as well. And what a wonderful note to end today on. Before I jump into the questions, I think we have some very special guests who would like to ask their questions first.
Oh, these are going to be hard.
Hi, my name is Lily, and my question is, what do you do differently to us to prevent you going low when you fly?
Well, to be honest, I don't think we do anything differently. If I've got a period of time where I don't want to be interrupted by my rude diabetes, I just make sure I do everything possible before that time to make sure my diabetes is going to be as well behaved as possible. So if it's flying an aeroplane, or if it's watching a nice movie, or if it's going out to dinner with my wife, if I don't want my diabetes to interrupt me beforehand, I'll make sure that I don't do any of the things that I know that make my diabetes go crazy. So I probably won't do any unexpected strenuous exercise. I probably won't have any really unusual food that I'm not familiar with. I'll eat food that I'm very familiar with. So for me, it's the peanut butter sandwich and an apple. I know I know exactly that gets absorbed at the same rate as my Nova Rapid gets absorbed, and I get this lovely flat line. My wife is in awe about how many peanut butter sandwiches back to back I can eat as meals. So that's what I do.
I'm the exact same. So it's all about prior preparation. So you do everything to prepare, and then for that finite period, you make sure it's well behaved, and then afterwards you can continue living your life. And so I'd say it's the exact same as anyone else in the world. I'm less with it on the peanut butter sandwiches. I tried my absolute hardest, and I remember flying back from Coffs Harbour, eating my 1000th peanut butter sandwich, and thinking, you know what, I'm pretty done with these actually. So my special meal's dark chocolate. A few bricks of dark chocolate. People think jet fuel keeps airliners in Australia flying. It's 90% lint, I can assure you that. But no, we don't do anything different that you would do.
Hi, my name is Arthur, and this is my question. What do you do say if someone says you eat that?
Someone says, should I eat that? Isn't that the most annoying question? I think it depends how I'm feeling. If I'm feeling like this person has just shown to me that they obviously don't know much about type 1 diabetes, I'll explain to them all the reasons why I can eat whatever I want and what I have to do that. If I'm not in a very patient mood or I'm in a hurry, I'll just say, yes, of course I can eat that. And I'll just eat it.
I'd be very similar to Jez again. I think if someone asked me, should I eat that, I might fire back, I don't know, should you? But I think, again, it shows just a bit of a lack of knowledge. And I think as we all found out today, knowledge is power. And we have to be more diplomatic, I think, sometimes than we're perhaps willing to be. And it's just about playing the game with that. And if you meet someone, maybe I'm an optimist, but I'm genuinely of the opinion people in the world don't have ill intentions. And so if someone asks an ill-informed question like that, I feel, you can approach it in a diplomatic way, and you're able to, maybe bring someone a bit more on the type 1 team that otherwise wouldn't have known about it previously.
Hi, my name's Penelope.
And my name's Zach, and this is our question.
Who inspires you?
Who inspires me? Well, I've spent pretty much all day in the kids' programs, and I got diagnosed when I was 31, so I never had to look after my diabetes when I was a kid. So sitting there at the table with all of you and watching all of you look at your watch, look at your phone, have your snakes and your jelly beans, ignore the text from your mum going, oh, it's just mum again. But looking after your diabetes at your age, that's amazing. That's what inspires me.
I'm the same. The kid, I'd love to have a creative response, but
Sorry.
but it's so obvious. I was diagnosed at 27, and there's kids here that are 5, 6, 7 years old, and they deal with it. And one of the things I used to think about was just how hard that would be as a kid in primary school and high school. And the resilience, resolve, and positivity these kids show is genuinely inspirational. I suppose another person as well I should probably say is my dad, who's sitting here. He's always seemed to say the right thing at the right time. Less so in his old age. He seems to have less pearls of wisdom. No, I'm joking. You're all right. But my old man definitely as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have, I'm hoping, time for some more questions. Wonderful. So the first one, we've got lots of likes on this one, is how would you suggest we increase this diabetes renaissance to other jobs that aren't up to date with understanding diabetes? My dream was to be a firefighter, but I was told by the organisation I'd never pass the physical, and I would like to advocate for change.
I think I could probably speak on behalf of Mindset, and I think, Jez, maybe you'd be better poised to speak on behalf of regulatory approach, given our experiences. But for me, I think from a Mindset standpoint, the reality is a lot of these organisations, it's not a question, it's not so much, oh no, it's a we don't know, it's in the too hard basket. And that's not an excuse for an organisation to sort of turn its back on people with type 1. So I would say persevere, crack on. I'm sure there's days where you get told no a lot as a type 1 diabetic, but you only need to be told yes once and stick with it. talk to your doctors, talk to your regulators, figure out what's in that physical, prove them wrong. Look, there are organisations where that's going to be a lot harder to do, but I think with some, I know I can't really comment on the fireys. I'm not, well versed in emergency services, but people always used to say you can do whatever you want to be with Type 1 except being a pilot. And we're doing that. So I think, that would be my...
Yeah, from a regulatory point of view, my suggestion would be to find the most similar occupation that allows Type 1 diabetics to perform it. Because I know we have police, I know we have Type 1 diabetics in the special forces part of the police. I reckon if you can do that, it could be a fiery. And it's then just finding the person in the police that's responsible for setting the medical standards, backing it up with your evidence and getting them to talk to the people that are responsible for setting the medical standards for the fireys. And just keep chipping away at it. Don't take no for an answer. Someone at some point during my journey said, if you lean against a fence post long enough, eventually it will fall over. And that's definitely been true in my case.
The squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Something like that.
Okay, another question for you, Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. I'm a GP in WA and mum to a toddler. She was diagnosed just over 12 months ago, was peri-arrest with significant hypokalemia in DKA 4 months prior to my fellowship exams. Subsequent diagnosis of celiac and Hashimoto's. Any advice on how to come to terms with it all on bad days?
Wow, that's the autoimmune trifecta, isn't it? I almost got diagnosed with celiac disease at the same time. My antibodies went sky high to the point where the gastroenterologist said, I've never seen someone with these levels who doesn't have it. But then they went down again. Weird. Dealing with bad days, and this is probably a question that would be better answered by the parents in the room, because when I have a bad day, it's just me. I just have to look after me, and that's my fault, my responsibility. When you're caring for a child, especially a very young child with Type 1 diabetes, I think that's a whole different mindset. I live in quiet, constant fear that one of my children is going to be diagnosed. I think I would be calling on the resources in the broader Type 1 community to find people.
Lean on the community.
Yeah.
Okay, now a question for you both. What do you do if your CGM fails during a flight and you know that it will take 24 hours for a new CGM to reach optimal calibration for BSL accuracy?
I've actually had this happen.
Perfectly primed to answer.
Yeah. We were about to depart Sydney we were en route from Sydney to Dubbo, and the CGM unit failed. And so what we have to hold a class 1 is a very clear protocol for blood sugar testing and time periods and when to do it. And the CGM far exceeds that, but when you transition off the CGM to a blood glucometer, the workload actually increases quite significantly. So I actually ended up testing my blood every 7 minutes to make sure, and it stayed at 8 millimole the entire flight. It didn't budge, or between 8 and 9, margin for error. And then when we got to the turnaround, I put a new sensor in. And as you say, the first 24 hours, it does take a second. It's like a guitar, I was explaining it to someone the other day, like a guitar string. It sort of wiggles and then it finds out at the completion of the wavelength. And basically, you just have to make it happen. But I have to say the CGMs are incredibly accurate even from the get-go. So I did have a period there on blood glucometers, and all that data was submitted to the regulator. And it was really interesting to see that, if you look at a flight on CGM, if there's a CGM reading every 5 minutes, and my CGM data for a flight is 2 hours prior to departure, off blocks, the gap between the pushback and the airborne time, the flight, the landing time, and the taxi back to the gate, and then 15 minutes afterwards. And with a blood glucometer, it was half the amount of data, but it was still complying with the CASA regulatory framework. So you do just test, and you basically just have to cop it. But in 1,000 flight hours, that's happened once, and I don't suspect it'll probably ever happen again. That was a bit of an anomaly, and all came with the territory of coming back to fly on CGM and as a type 1 diabetic.
Yeah, the concept in aviation, the reason big airplanes are so safe is that they all have multiple layers of redundancy. You know, if one thing breaks, there are at least 2 others of them that will continue to do the job. So when we designed the protocol for type 1 flying here, and it's insulin dependent flying, so type 2 people using insulin can also fly commercially using this, was to think through all those possible failures, systems failures, and how do we manage that systems failure. So yeah, if your CGM fails, you've got a backup sensor, backup transmitter that you can insert straight away, and you've got a backup glucometer, preferably 2, and you just run that at regular intervals so that, yes, there's a slight degradation in the data, but it's not suddenly a complete absence of data, so that the integrity and safety of the system is maintained.
Exactly. Yeah, when I used to fly pre-type 1, I had a nav bag that was about this big. And now with all the equipment I carry with me, when I go fly from a redundancy perspective, it's about twice the size, which is what it is. You know, still fits in the bag, I still make it happen, but it just means there's more stuff.
And similarly on this topic, what are the guidelines for flying a plane when you have T1D? Are they the same as a car, like BGL's above 5, or is it more specific?
No, so
more
driving's just that one dot point. Look, if you're interested, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority website has a page dedicated to this. So casa.gov.au, and if you just type in type 1 diabetes, you'll find the page, and it's a multi-page document. But the broad concept is you have to be an adequately well-controlled diabetic that has not had significant hypoglycemic events requiring assistance. You can't have a significant amount of long-term side effects of diabetes, and you have to demonstrate to the regulator that you are able to adequately control your diabetes when you go flying. So the great thing about that is you don't have to be a superhuman diabetic. You don't have to be one of those militant low-carb diabetics that post those flatline CGM traces on social media. That's it. That's not it at all. You can be quite a normal type 1 diabetic and meet the criteria.
And another one for you, Ben. Super inspirational stories. How supportive was Rex during your recovery, and how crucial was their support to your recovery?
It was incredible. Rex got behind me from day one, and they redeployed me in a non-flying position in the year I had off, and then when I came to fly, they facilitated my return. That's part of the reason why I went to Adelaide to fly my first flight. I had to fly with a particular pilot within the company. Rex facilitated that, and Rex have been supportive throughout. So without Rex being on the bandwagon, there's no way I would have been able to go back and fly. So I have to say a massive thank you to Rex and the entire team there, and also my colleagues as well. So, massive thank you to the management team there, but also my colleagues at Rex who got behind me, and were super supportive on days where it was challenging and days where, the temptation was to maybe just chill out, not go as hard as I was going with my recovery. And, thanks to the company and thanks to amazing people there, I was able to come back and fly. So a massive thank you to Rex for sure.
That's wonderful. Okay, we have 2 comments and then I'll end on our final question. The first comment is, bravo and thank you for your commitment to treading a path of success with type 1 for yourselves and the wider community. I'm so grateful to have heard your story today. You're both beautiful souls. And the second one is, how inspirational, thank you. What a wonderful way to end this summit. Go type 1 strong. And very important question to end on. On a 14-hour flight from Brisbane to LA, and the plane leaves at 9:30 p.m, how soon do we get fed on Qantas? And can I ask for snacks between meals or take snacks with me?
You can definitely take snacks with you. There is generally a meal service fairly promptly after the aeroplane reaches cruising altitude. And I think you would be well within your rights to go and ask for food at any point you like during the flight.
Excellent. You heard it here first, guys. You can ask for the snacks. Thank you so much for joining us for our session. Give a big round of applause to Jeremy and Ben.